Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy, excited for today's conversation with Gen Z activist and dynamo, Victor Shi. We'll get to Victor in just a couple of seconds, but first, let me thank you for tuning in today. We do appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments, so email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. Let me tell you a little bit about Victor. He is a Gen Z speaker, writer, and organizer. He currently hosts the daily show On the Move with Victor Shi and co-hosts iGen Politics with Jill Wine-Banks. He also serves as strategy director for Voters of Tomorrow, is a writer for Resolute Square, and is a rising senior at UCLA. Previously, Victor was elected the youngest delegate for Joe Biden, organized on presidential, state, and local campaigns, and interned at the DNC and the White House. He has also appeared on MSNBC, CNN, PBS, and has been published by, among others, CNN, USA Today, and the Chicago Tribune. Victor, welcome into the back room.
Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to talk with you. I love talking to young people who are really engaged in politics, especially now that America seems to always be teetering on the brink of autocracy. But before we get into the issues of the day, I want to go back a little bit in time, back to your early youth. Little Victor, what were you like as a little kid? Were you walking around like carrying portfolios full of Obama speeches? What was happening when you were like 8, 9? What were your interests? When did this all start for you?
Well, I wish I could say I was as passionate about politics as I am right now, but I was up until 8th grade, I was pretty much just your average kid. I would play video games. I would go out and, go outdoors, play sports. I mean, it's actually a little bit cringeworthy for me to think about what I was like younger, but I got involved in politics when I was in 8th grade because I was sitting in the back of my social studies classroom, and my teacher lectured all of us on the political spectrum. It was a couple of weeks before the Iowa caucuses in 2016. And it was really interesting because she explained, what Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton stood for. And then on the other end, of course, what Donald Trump stood for. And then at the end, she told all of her students that we could make a difference if we got involved in politics. And so I did that. I went to a congressional office for the first time and just asked, how can I get involved? And lo and behold, they said, you can knock some doors, do, what typical organizers do. And so I interned for them that summer. And then ever since, the rest is history. And I've just been grateful to have teachers like my 8th grade teacher, but also my AP government teacher, who really fostered this sense of civic engagement and political activity within me. And ever since, it's just been a wild ride. But really, teachers have been the backbone of my kind of political engagement.
Teachers are really the ones that inspire and motivate children at a very young age to do so many things. And in our country, unfortunately, the emphasis on education, the resources dedicated to public education in particular, it's like no one seems to really care. No one seems to appreciate just how important teachers are. I mean, teachers, what they make, it's the most important job in the world, and they make nothing.
I mean, they are the unsung heroes of our democracy in so many different ways. I mean, shaping just the way that, at least for me, if it weren't for example, my English teacher in high school, I wouldn't be an English major now. And I think that just the way that teachers and sort of the impact they can have on students is, we don't give them, like you said, as much credit as we should. And, just in terms of supporting teachers, like you said, they deserve higher pay. They deserve better conditions. No one should be going through, all the attacks on education and teachers as we're seeing right now in Florida. But, at least for me, they've had such a profound impact. And I think for so many people, they have such a big influence. And I wish they got more than what they have now. But if any of the teachers are listening to this podcast, I hope they all know just how much I appreciate them and we all appreciate you.
And so aside from teachers, who are your early inspirations?
Oh, gosh. Well, my parents did have a big influence on me. I will also say, like, growing up, I read, I was a big Harry Potter kid. That was fun to read. But I didn't really have like anyone who I was like starstruck by. I guess maybe Obama, because I'm from Chicago and I remember seeing the 2008, inauguration in Grant Park from home. And it was just such an inspiring, hopeful moment of, this is what the best of our country looks like when people from so many different backgrounds can come together and elect the first Black man as president. And so I think Obama has always sort of lived with me as, being a Chicagoan, but I didn't really have anyone who I was, starstruck by.
Mm-hmm. Taylor Swift?
Perhaps, although now Taylor Swift is making I'm not a Swiftie, and many of my Gen Z peers shame me for that. But the other day it was reported that Taylor Swift has done a lot to register young people to vote. And it's quite remarkable.
35,000. And you tweeted a lot about that. You mentioned the canvassing that you did, but what was your first real involvement in politics?
Yes. So I would say, a lot of my political kind of formation and I guess just the way that I kind of grew up in politics was through that first experience. I was interning for Congressman Brad Schneider here and just in Illinois, and knocking on doors, making phone calls, just really kind of getting those kind of grassroots organizing skills. And then I did that basically throughout high school. My first ever paid position on a campaign was for the Biden campaign in 2020, just as an organizer in Minnesota. It was all during COVID, which was really interesting time, but it was just all phone calls, managing a team, but kind of starting off as that kind of organizing position. And then later on, I sort of branched out into more of the communications realm with some interesting organizations and think tanks throughout the past couple of summers. But really, I would say a lot of sort of the way that I think about politics and just reaching people and forming those relationships was through that first internship back in between 8th grade and high school, interning for Congressman Brad Schneider, and just walking and knocking on doors, talking to people, having conversations.
And how does a young person who is politically motivated, politically engaged, or a political junkie, how does one become a Biden organizer and then ultimately a Biden delegate? How does that process work?
Yeah. So I think there's two different tracks. I think being an organizer is definitely something that, at least for me, I started off on the Biden campaign really early on. I would do trips from Illinois to Iowa basically every weekend. And a lot of politics, and this is I think the amazing part about campaigning and politics, is that I think it's one of the kind of last kind of remaining true meritocracies, in the sense that if you show up on a campaign, you do the work, you just say yes to everything, you show up and you stay late, you'll get rewarded really quickly. And if you're good at your job, I think people will see that. And so I would just go to Iowa and just volunteer and knock on doors. And then after the 2020 convention, I got asked if I wanted to, do an organizing position. And I said yes, because it was just one of those things where, it's an election of our lifetime. And so that sort of, I think, is partly what led me to organizing. But being a Biden delegate is actually a much more complicated and esoteric process. My AP government teacher back in high school basically told me that as long as you turn 18 by election day in November, you can run to become a delegate for any presidential candidate. And so I said, I guess why not? And so I applied to become a Biden delegate, and then I got enough petition signatures, and then I started campaigning. But it was
wait, just back up for 1 second. Yeah. When you say you applied, what does that mean? Where does one go? So, there's a young person out there who wants to be a Biden delegate. Where do they actually start?
Right. So at least in Illinois, for me, I remember the first kind of way that I learned about it was by going to this meeting that basically every congressional district has for anyone interested in becoming a delegate for a presidential campaign. And then at that meeting, there would be campaign representatives from each campaign, and then you would get connected with them, and then fill out an application to, put your name into possibly becoming a delegate. And then from there, if they select you, then you'll be given all the materials you need to start gathering petition signatures, which lasts usually from November up until February from November until December or January of the presidential election year. And then after that, it's basically, as long as you get enough petition signatures, your name is on the ballot, and then you start campaigning and just try to do your best after that. And then come primary day, then your people vote for you. And then
people meaning you're actually campaigning as if you're running for office, like that.
Right.
It's the same process.
Yes. Yes. But the way that delegates are then kind of awarded, and this is all kind of where luck fell into place, was it's proportional. So in your congressional district, there are about 5 delegates per presidential candidate. And let's say if Joe Biden wins 60% of the vote, which he did in my congressional district, 3 of his 5 delegates end up going to the convention. And so for me in 2020, I was actually I barely got enough votes to end up in 3rd place. And so I ended up going to the convention, but all virtually because of COVID.
Mm-hmm. That must have been just incredible to be a part of that kind of process.
I mean, it's definitely surreal, but I like it. At the end of the day, it's just knowing that, as messy as politics is at many times, it's just, I think there's something about knowing that you can be a part of something bigger than yourself and be a part of something where if you deeply believe in it, hopefully you're contributing in some way, no matter how big or small. But, I think for any young person who's thinking about going into politics, it really just starts at, whatever level you feel comfortable with. And it doesn't matter how big or small of an impact you have, it's an impact. And I think that's sort of what I've felt like, at least during my time in politics, is just knowing that, if you even have one conversation with someone and you're able to change that person's mind or get them to think about things maybe a little bit differently, that's just, there's no feeling better than that.
And so where do you go with this experience that you've acquired so far? Like, do you have aspirations to run for alderman in Chicago or Congress someday? I mean, where do you see yourself in 5, 10, 15 years politically?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot. I don't think I'm going to run for office. I think that has already happened, and I would love to just help out on the community. I'm really passionate about communications, and I find the whole kind of dying down of traditional legacy media and the kind of spurring of like new media and different ways of communication to be really fascinating. And so I think I'm much better behind the scenes, but definitely involved in campaigns and maybe government work sometime, but probably won't be running or launching a campaign for myself anytime soon.
I think you're a natural politician, so I don't know. I'm not so sure. Never say never, but so you got On the Move, which is your podcast, and then you do iGen Politics with Jill Wine-Banks. You having fun doing podcasts?
Oh yeah, that both are really fun. So the one that I do with Jill Wine-Banks was the first one that I did, and that's been going on for more than 3 years, which is crazy to think about. But we both met when we were running to become Biden delegates. Jill, my co-host, was running a couple districts up north, and we met at the delegate kind of convention, or the Illinois delegate party meeting. And I remember seeing her and I was like, "You're Jill Wine-Banks, who I see on TV talking about, like the Mueller report, right?" And she said, yes. And she wondered, how someone can be so young and still support Biden. Because at the time, there weren't many young people supporting then candidate Joe Biden. And so we thought, it would be interesting to create something where, we can bridge the intergenerational divide. And so we thought of doing a podcast, and it's just been sort of a dream come true. As for her, she was a journalism major in college, and for her now to be able to interview people, and then for me, as just a young person who kind of sees people on TV, and then to email them and say, would you be interested? And then we'll say yes. It's just been one of the, and as you know, I mean, it's just such a cool thing to talk to people who you just admire, and so that's been a really awesome podcast, and we just try to kind of bridge the generational divide and from our different generational perspectives. And the one that I do is more shorter form, about 10, 15 minutes, and interviews people with sort of a Gen Z focus, and talks about some of the issues that are facing Generation Z, and both are just really fun to do. A lot of work, but it's really fun to do both.
So with regard to Gen Z and the issues that are important and the election that's going to be coming up next year, when you think about gun reform, when you think about climate, when you think about choice and the right to have an abortion and reproductive rights, saving democracy, one would think that if young people don't vote now, what is ever going to motivate them to vote? You tweeted in April, quote, "Mark my words, Gen Z is watching, Gen Z is paying attention, and Gen Z will make Republicans in Tennessee and across the nation pay for messing around with our lives in 2024. Is that going to happen?
I am a strong believer that will happen. And I say that because of two things. I think first, Republicans right now, I think, are waging a war on young people like we've never seen before. And you see the response in places that are traditionally red, like Tennessee, like Florida, Texas, where you have Republicans actively working against basically everything that young people care about. When you go down each of those issues, abortion rights, trying to overturn reproductive rights. When you talk about gun violence, there's no action being taken at all by these Republican state legislatures to move on this issue. When you talk about climate change, when you talk about just literally anything else, there is nothing that they're doing that would benefit our lives. And I think young people are really, whether you're Republican, whether you're a Democrat, I think people are just sort of exhausted by this inaction from elected officials. That's why you see people going to the streets. That's why you see people now running for office at record high rates, young people running for office at record high rates. I think that's really going to be an indication of what's to come. There was also a really interesting Politico piece recently about the shift of college towns to increasingly kind of democratic, increasingly democratic sides. And I mean, it's astronomical, just the way that the electorate has shifted from 2000 to 2020 in college towns. And people have gotten way more democratic. And I think partly it's because Republicans have just been really bad on trying to kind of engage with young people. So I think that's kind of one end of it. And I think the other end of it, and this is, I think it needs to be amplified a lot more, but what President Biden and Kamala Harris are doing for young people right now, in just this week alone that we're recording this, President Biden launched the first ever gun violence prevention office at the White House, the first ever climate civilian corps. I mean, and he's done a lot of different things for Gen Zers that no president has ever done. And so I think when Gen Zers kind of look at our political climate right now, I think they're going to go to the ballot box knowing, one, the threat that Republicans pose for our lives, but also at the end of the day, as much as some people might be concerned about Biden's age, people will look at this record and see that there really is only one person in 2024 who will deliver for us. And I think combined that will increase, or I guess really motivate a young electorate that is sick and tired of just kind of Republican nonsense and just restore a sense of normalcy.
I've said many times that I don't really understand the voting statistics in this country. In the Democratic Party, for example, maybe it's 55 to 60% of the party votes in an election. And it boggles my mind that, like, we don't see 90% turnout among young people. Yeah. You have your whole life ahead of you. People your age have their whole lives ahead of them. How are we not at 90%, given what we know where we are in this country and the threat to young people and young people's future and the planet? Why are we not at 90%?
Yeah. I wish we were at 90%. And I think part of the reason why you see it turnout kind of, or at least for younger generations, lagging behind that of older generations, I think first it's just, I think young people traditionally have had this sense that government doesn't work for them. Why will my vote matter? All of those kind of traditional notions for why young people don't vote. But I think since 2018, you see, and the data shows this, is that, young people are voting at rates much higher compared to younger people in the past. And I think part of that is because, one, government just really hasn't worked for them, and they want to see people who will actually represent their interests. And so there really isn't, I think more young people now realize that going to the streets or posting on social media or just sort of traditional activism won't cut it, that voting is really the last option we have. A perfect example is gun violence. We can go to the streets all we want, but at the end of the day, if we have elected officials who are still beholden to the NRA or who won't take action on gun violence, it doesn't matter because laws are what will change things. And so I think now there's a sense among young people that voting is really the last option and the only option we have if we want to create systemic and long change. But I still think, the numbers aren't as high as where we need them to be. And the challenge is going to be for Democrats to really do their job, going to college campuses, getting young people to become civically engaged, do registration drives. As we were talking about Taylor Swift, everyone has their part, I think, in this election to do, to get young people to care about and to register to vote. And so, it's going to be a challenge. But I think if there is one election where you're going to see a lot of young people really turn out, I mean, in 2020, the numbers were more than half of young people. I hope it's, like you said, 90%. The vast majority of young people will go out there and vote. But I think this election we will see record rates.
The people who say, like, my vote doesn't count, the truth is, even in an inequitable country like America, in many ways, there's one day out of the year where the billionaire and the janitor are equal. Where they have the exact same power and the power to move the needle. That's point one. Point two is that I see a shift in young people going from the system doesn't work, government doesn't work for me, to I could change that system. I could change government if I get in the system. You look at people like Maxwell Frost down in Florida. Like, that's how, like it or not, you don't just do away with what we have. That's not realistic. It's not going to happen. But what you can do is get in the system and you change it from within.
Yes.
And that's been very inspiring to see more and more young people in the last 2, 3, 4, 6 years jump into the system, because that is how it's going to change, isn't it?
Absolutely. And there are so many phenomenal organizations out there who are trying to get young people more young people elected and running for office. One organization is Run for Something, founded by Amanda Littman, and she has amazing statistics on her website about the number of young people over the past 5 years who have expressed interest in running for office, who have actually run for office, and the number of young people who have won office. I mean, you just mentioned Maxwell Frost, but there's also, Nabila Syed from my home state, Illinois, became the first Gen Z member of the state legislature. You have now in 2024, another Gen Zer running for office across in Maryland and Texas. And so it's really remarkable, I think, what we're seeing, this trend of young people going, like you said, within the system to change things. And that's how you're really going to get things moving, is if, you end up going to the system, offering that perspective. And I think there's a hunger for that. Mm-hmm. I think people want to see that sort of representation. And what that does then is it inspires other young people to get involved in the system too. When they see one of their peers running, it makes us much more excited to get involved on a campaign or to go vote, because we see someone like us actually getting involved and showing that we can be in the system and we can actually make a difference.
Mm-hmm. And there are also issue-specific people, like David Hogg, for example, with gun reform.
Yes.
Voices like that not only bring their own experience, personal experience, but are so good at articulating that particular position. And the more young people we see like that, whether it's women's rights or gun rights or climate, I think that kind of engagement is just so critical. And speaking of engagement, you are quite a prolific tweeter. And so I want to shift the conversation to Trump. You've been tweeting a lot in the last 24 hours about something Mehdi Hasan, the anchor from MSNBC, posted. It was a brilliant montage of Trump's cognitive impairment. He took all the clips over the last 8 years and literally presented a case in about a minute and a half of essentially, let's not talk about Joe Biden. Joe Biden's okay. Listen to this guy. And do you think things like that are effective, or is it just preaching to the choir?
This is something I think about so much, because I for one, being in the communications world, I mean, it's so frustrating to see the number of outlets who are solely focused on Joe Biden's age. Sure, he's 80 years old, but he's only 3 years older than, Trump, who's 77 years old. And, there just seems to be this really heavy emphasis on Joe Biden when the record and what he's doing speaks for itself. I mean, he recently went to, India, and then went to Vietnam, and then went to Alaska, and then went to DC, all within the span of 4 days. And it's like, if I did that, I would be, sleeping for the next 2 weeks. But Biden's still doing his job, but the media still focuses on his age so much. And so I think to have voices like Mehdi Hasan, who did an amazing montage, who I urge all of your audience to check out. It's a 3-minute long clip, and he just does such a good job showing, if we're really going to talk about age, let's talk about Trump's age just as much as we talk about Biden's age. Let's not shy away from that. And I think there is this sort of, reluctance from mainstream media to talk about Trump's age, maybe because they think it won't get them ratings. I don't know what it is, but it's this lack of willingness to, I think, call out Trump's age. And I think Mehdi Hasan, whether or not it reaches Republicans, I don't know, but at least it gets the narrative kind of going that, talk about Trump's age too. Don't forget about that. And I think the more we can see that from people like Mehdi Hasan, people who are who have a platform, who can reach people, I think that's really important.
It's interesting. The instances of Joe Biden's issues with quote unquote mental acuity versus that of Trump are astoundingly disparate. And to your point, Biden is flying all over the world. He's meeting with heads of NATO, heads of state. When you see him at a podium, he's talking statistics. He's going on and on. And so once in a while, he screws up. Trump sounds like a moron 24/7. It's like all you hear about is Biden, yet he's the guy that's doing so much shit and gets cut no slack whatsoever. We live in an upside down world, and it's crazy.
Yeah. I don't know if it's because that's the only thing that the media thinks that if it, it talks about Joe Biden's age, then it will attract more viewers. But, I often think about, just imagine a world in which the media could cover just policies that Biden has passed. I mean, that could be just spending 5 minutes in each, hour talking about everything Biden has done. It would be revolutionary if the media did that. But no, they talk about Biden's age. They talk about the polls when, they really don't really mean much anymore. But it's just this lack of willingness to call Trump out for these things. And like you said, I don't know if it's both sides. Margaret Sullivan recently had a piece in The Guardian that talked about the way that the mainstream media covers things. And it's all sort of in the veneer of neutrality and objectivity, when you literally have a party right now that seeks to destroy democracy. You have a former president who's been indicted four times, who is a proven rapist, who has been impeached twice, and we still treat him like a normal presidential candidate. And it's like, that has to be long gone. There is only one serious party right now and one serious presidential candidate right now, and it's Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. And so I think for the media, they have a lot of soul searching to do. I hope Mehdi Hasan's video montage at least gets the ball rolling a little bit about talking more about Trump's age, talking more about Trump's deficiencies, and spending a little bit less time on Biden's age and talking more about Biden's historic record and accomplishments. That's what I think viewers also really want. But mainstream media, I don't think will ever, I don't know. I hope they change.
So you have one candidate who is all about policy. And to me, he is the most successful, productive first-term president in modern history, perhaps all of history. And on the other hand, you have a candidate who doesn't give a shit about policy. It's all performative. And the people who love him are there at the Jerry Springer show. That's it. And so the media, they just go where they think the audience is. I don't know why they don't do a better job.
And you saw that with Kristen Welker's interview with Trump. I mean, there were so many moments where I think Kristen Welker could have been more forceful on pushing back on all of his lies, but she didn't. But then Mehdi Hasan, I think, is a great journalist. So is Jon Stewart, who
Absolutely.
shows us how to push back. Mehdi Hasan interviewed Vivek Ramaswamy, and, he just asked a simple question of, is this what you stand for? Vivek wouldn't answer. And he kept on asking and asking. And that's sort of, I can't believe more journalists don't know how to do that, or more anchors don't know how to do that, or maybe they're not willing to do that. But, with these candidates, you can't let them get away with things. You have to hold their feet to the fire. You have to present evidence and receipts, come prepared. I mean, those are things, if Mehdi Hasan and Jon Stewart could do a boot camp for all anchors, I think that would be really beneficial.
You're right. And I'm glad you brought up Mehdi Hasan again, because I'm a huge fan of him because of what you're saying. He is on a major news network. He is the anchor of a show, and he's showing us that it can be done. I saw that interview with Ramaswamy, where Ramaswamy is talking about some documents and what he said. And he's like, no, I've got it right here. I've got it right here. And Ramaswamy kept lying, even though the receipts are right here. But that's okay. At the end of the day, if you expose them for the liars they are, that's fine. But there is that normalization you mentioned before. A, they want to get these people on in the first place. B, they want them to come back. C, they don't want to ruffle the campaign people's feathers, the RNC. They don't want to ruffle any feathers. And if that's what your motivation is, then you just de facto go to this place of normalization, because that's the alternative. You either normalize it or you call it out for the fucking lunacy that it is. There's no middle ground.
Right. And it seems like it's repeating exactly what happened in 2016, which is, I remember just taking that, Trump interview with Kristen Welker as another example. In 2016, one of the things I think the media messed up on was treating everything Trump said as if it were a headline and it deserved attention, and, putting every single tweet that he would post during his presidency up on the screen. And they did the exact same thing in last week, when Trump said something about, how I am the most I am a pro-abortion candidate, and, this is what I believe. And as if, he's some, pro-choice candidate. And, NBC ran a headline that said, exclusive, this is what Trump said. And it's like, you should not be running that headline. There are these things where not everything he says is newsworthy, and we shouldn't be giving it the legitimacy or the credibility that it deserves, because the man literally installed, 3 Supreme Court justices, made it his entire campaign to overturn abortion, or his entire presidency to overturn abortion. He did that. And there are multiple instances since then that he said that he would want to restrict abortion even further. And so I think the media really has to think before it, runs these headlines. And it's just nothing that he says should be that newsworthy anymore, and should not be the leading headline on a major news site. But it seems like, these publications aren't learning from their mistakes.
My last question to you is about being woke. To me, woke means you're not sleeping anymore, right? That's it. Very simple. Very literal
Yeah,
definition.
right.
It's been so associated with your generation, young people in general. To me, woke means you just give a shit about people who are
Yeah,
suffering, people who are needy. What does
yeah.
being woke mean to you?
I mean, it's being aware, having basic empathy, knowing that our country has had long-term systemic struggles with racism and that it requires all of us to do our part to hopefully right those wrongs. But I think part of the reason why it's becoming this term is, I think this partly speaks to the then Democrats are on, is hanging on to these really innocuous and meaningless words and somehow manipulating them and turning them into things that people then somehow have a fear of, and being able to kind of catch on to these slogans. I mean, it's just something that Republicans are able to do much better than Democrats. But I think for the vast majority of young people, I mean, I was just having this conversation with someone from college about, the whole war on critical race theory. And I asked him, did you know what CRT was before Republicans started to make a campaign out of it? And he said, no. I mean, and neither did I. I mean, these are not things that young people are learning in the classroom, at least before law school, which is a term, which is where it usually is taught. But I mean, Republicans are somehow making these words into these, phrases that there just aren't. But young people, I think see right through that. But I think at the end of the day, when you talk about wokeness, when you talk about CRT, when you talk about DEI, it's just about how we can build a better future where people don't have to, go through these really terrible, racist and misogynistic and just homophobic, systems. And we can start to build a future that, we can all live in.
Yeah. So clearly you're not suffering from the woke mind virus, are you?
I don't think so.
Okay. I mean, it just seems so common sense. It's just,
Yeah.
there's a world out there that just doesn't involve just me.
Right.
There are people
Right.
that I'm aware of what they're going
Yes.
through.
Yes.
My last question to you is: we here in the back room like to get a window into people's souls, and the best way to do that is through music. Or we already discussed Taylor Swift, but I want to know your top 5 musical artists.
Ooh. Well, number one is definitely Adele. I adore her voice and just her authenticity, and I respect it. I mean, there are many out there, but I feel like she's one of the last remaining artists who, like, when she goes to perform, like, it's just her voice and she sounds better than she does through an album. And so she's really great. I also recently, a friend sent me Pink. Pink is like an inspiring figure. I mean, the fact that she's able to do backflips in the air while still singing, she's quite amazing. I don't know. Oh gosh. I mean, I think a lot of my music is actually shaped from the activities I do. So like in the morning, I do Orange Theory, which is a workout class, and they do a lot of like EDM music and, so some of the EDM tracks are fun, but I'm mostly into pop. I also recently have gotten into classical music, more. When I go to school in LA, and I would go to the LA Philharmonic Orchestra, at the Walt Disney Concert Hall, and I saw Bach, who had some great performances, and Beethoven and Mozart. And so, I mean, I'm a huge fan of those works. That's a very relaxing kind of mindset to be in with all the craziness in the world. So I have a pretty wide array of musical taste, I would say.
Well, it doesn't surprise me that you're into classical, because you clearly have an acute understanding of the bigger world out there and all that goes with it. Victor, this was a fascinating
Can I
conversation.
ask, what about you?
What?
For music.
Oh, music. God. 115 episodes. You're the first person to ever ask me that. So congratulations. You get a special prize. I got to say, top on my list, the Beatles. I know it sounds like probably every old white guy saying that, but the Beatles. I will throw in the obvious classic rock choices that I love: Stones, Zeppelin, Bob Dylan. But I also like to add genres. Like, I love 90s gangster rap. I love 90s grunge, or Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pavement, all those bands. But as I've said to many people on this show, for me, there's the Beatles, and then there's everyone else. So in the everyone else bucket, there's like 100,
Yeah.
So I can just...
Same here.
But I also love classical. I love opera, Latin music. Music is just amazing. So it's interesting to hear you talk about the range of categories and artists that you're into, because I think it kind of aptly describes who you are as a person. You gave us the window into the Victor soul that I was hoping for. This was a great conversation. I hope you come back and continue to give us your opinions and views as we move through the campaign and as we approach the election. And yeah, I think your perspective as a young person is not only fascinating, but it's really critical. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Andy.
Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.